Ladies and gentlemen, can I request you to please put your phones on silent, vibrate, anything that won't disturb us in the middle of the evening, right? Welcome for the next edition of Trendspotting, right? The topic for this evening is Rethinking Academia, right? We have a lovely group of panelists, and can I invite the four of you to come up and take your places? So the Habitat Center and Health Advisors set up Trendspotting last year, and the idea behind Trendspotting was to create a space for gray area nuanced discussions. Right? And the idea was to create discussions where you could get different perspective, different lenses on complex issues, right? Without necessarily needing to head towards one end goal. So we don't have an end goal for today's conversation, right? We have a starting point. We have a kind of roadmap of where we might go, right? But I can promise you different lenses. The way this evening is going to work is we are first going to have a discussion on the panel for about, let's say, about 45 minutes, right? We'll then open it to questions or brief comments that you might have from the floor. We'll keep re-engaging with the panel during that. And when we've all kind of said what we had to say, we'll go away hopefully feeling slightly more enlightened than when we came in. And that's the end goal of this evening, right? So let me introduce the panelists to you, right, in the way I would best remember them, that is from one side to the other. Right. To my immediate left, we have Professor Ananya Mukherjee. Her formal title is she's the Vice Chancellor of Shivnadi University, but she's also a renowned economist. Right? She spent her career before SNU at the University of British Columbia in Canada, and she's come to SNU from UBC. Right? To her left is Professor Ambut Sagar. So he has different administrative titles, but he is an very exciting engineer who's turned into the public policy space and was the founding dean of the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi. He has previously done academic work at IIT Delhi, at Harvard and MIT, including spending many, many years at Harvard. He now is also the deputy director for strategy at IIT Delhi, and he holds a named chair at IIT Delhi. To his left is Shobhini Mukherjee, and Shobhini Mukherjee is from the LSE, but more than the LSE, she has for almost 2 decades now been the executive director for South Asia of JPAL. And JPAL, as I hope many of you know, is a lab that originated out of MIT, which uses RCTs in public policy and work around the world in alleviating poverty in different ways using evidence-backed techniques. And Shobhini's been in the middle of all of that for 2 decades now. And to the extreme left, right, is Dr. Shipra Mishra. And Shipra's also spent a lot of time in the UK before coming to her role now, which is she's the CEO of Drive, which is an organization that has been set up by the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. And Shipra is the CEO of that, and it's a very interesting organization because in a sense it's a convening organization for looking at the way academia, industry, policy can all come together, and they have different thematic areas, and it's also divided into different clusters around the country, and so the Delhi cluster is something that Shipra looks after very, very closely. So we have a panel that knows more about almost any topic than I do, but I'm the moderator, so I get to speak right in the beginning. And without much ado, we are now going to begin. And as I promised Ambuj, no flowers and garlands, so away we go. Okay, so what are we talking about in Rethinking Academia? And there's certain ideas that we want to shape and share today. Is that there are a number of parallel conversations that go on in the world. You have the world of academics and research, which is a conversation within its peer group, right? You then have a conversation with public policy. You have a conversation with investors. You have a conversation with the lay public, and you have several other conversations. Now, these conversations sometimes overlap and sometimes don't overlap. Is to look at the nature of research itself, right? Is research, in a sense, what academics do, right? So that whatever academics do is research, right? Or does research have at the back of its mind an applied motive that must drive that research?
Well, I mean, I think the point for anybody who's in academia, I think maybe the main driver for pretty much most academics is they want to be able to do whatever they want, study whatever they want, right? And so I think to have a general proposition that all research must be applied, I think may work for some people, but some people are really interested mostly maybe just the pursuit of knowledge. I'm a philosopher. I don't necessarily have to be thinking of the application of my work, or even if I'm, maybe a biologist who's thinking about trying to understand fundamental behavior of fundamental level of biological systems. It may have some utility down the line, but doesn't necessarily have to start with that. But then, of course, there are many people. Of course, I teach at Institute of Engineering, and most engineers are driven by application in some way or the other. I'm at the School of Public Policy, and of course, we also think about the application of a work. So I think it really is a mix of both. There are some people who will be driven by application, but I don't think it's really necessary. But I think all good research will generate new knowledge. I think that's absolutely true. And that knowledge can be in different forms, and maybe we can get into it later, different way how you generate knowledge and how that's changing. So when one was thinking about rethinking academia, I think it really is not just the research we do, basic applied, but also how we do it. I'll stop with that.
So I'm going to pick on that later with you about knowledge and how do you value the knowledge that's created. I'm going to pick on that a bit later with you, but I'm going to take it on to Ananya after that. That Ananya, now not wearing your hat as an academic, but wearing your hat as an administrator, right? There's always the issue of competing resources, right, on it. And it comes down to wearing your hat as a vice chancellor, as an administrator of academics. I see some of your colleagues here in the audience, and they'll be coming to you with grant applications and things like that, right? Now, how do you balance this out, right? And how do you think through, this research is not as good as this research, and I need to fund this, and I don't need to fund this, right? And how do you create those balances of funding something and not funding something else?
Okay. First of all, I never can take off my hat as an academic. Whatever I do, that's the role or the profession that I love. So for better or for worse, even, and I've said this many times, that in all my years in administration, I have found more and more a need to be an academic. What does that mean? Just the example you gave, that decision making can be completely ad hoc. I can just choose that, this grant has the possibility of success, easy success, a lot of money, let's fund that. That could be a purely administrative fiscal decision. As an academic, you're not allowed to do that. As an academic, you must evaluate all information that is in front of you. And as Ambud said, that research can be curiosity-driven for production of new knowledge, which may or may not have immediate application. And research may be applied to a problem that is absolutely as immediate, let's say, COVID or climate change, and etc. So if I am to make that decision as an administrator, I will still bring the academic process, which is to evaluate evidence, to think of all of the various criteria and all kinds of. I think the greatest gift that academia has given me is to always be able to think of a set of criteria which should go into a decision making. And second is from a normative standpoint, to always have to think of a justification. That if I spend $1, rupee, can I justify it from the perspective of what academia is supposed to achieve? And so if I bring that lens, then my decisions would be of a certain kind. Are they going to be always balanced according to the most immediate goal? Is it always going to be balanced by, awarding the most senior faculty with the most publications to date to be the winner? Probably not. Probably it is going to, but I will always have a set of criteria, hopefully collectively decided, not by me, by a committee, which will bring different lenses into the decision. And we will be able to apply the criteria objectively and have a justification, either from the perspective of society, from the perspective of creating new knowledge, from the perspective of university. And that's how I will go about it. And this, all the time having to balance being that so-called administrator and academic is very difficult. But that is what drives me. And I would think that that is what drives many academics who became or made the mistake of or somehow became administrators.
So before I bring Shobhini and Shipra into this, I want to just explore one idea between the two of you on this, is that, a lot of research, hopefully a lot of research doesn't know the answer before you begin, right on it. And so you're working in a gray area there when you are approving some research or funding some research or participating in research as, you want to be a collaborator and somebody comes to you and says, will you work on this? Now, you've got this gray area where you've got this great idea or somebody's got this great idea and you don't know if it's going to work or not. And you've got a bunch of people out there, Shashank, Veera and others, who say, okay, what's the output going to be? How are we going to measure this at the end of it? You don't have the foggiest idea what it's going to be, leave alone how it's going to be measured, right, on it. Now, that's an area of conflict between people who think research must always give you an answer that's useful, right, on it. And sometimes the most interesting areas are areas where you know that it's an area that you might want to work on, but you don't know where it's going to go. Right?
You want to go first, Ambuj?
Yeah.
Very clever. Shashank, two things. One, I think in any research, there's always some element of the unknown. Because if there's not, it's not really
Then
research.
why do it?
Right?
Exactly.
So, I think the way to think about this, at least for me, is what's really key is the question you're asking. It's not where you think it's going to take you. You can't predict that fully. But to me, and I always have this conversation with my students actually, that really the essence of good research is asking the right kind of question. Once you ask that right kind of question, you may have some sense of where it takes you. And so I think you can't, let's say, you're talking to a funder, right? And you can't just tell a funder, I'm going to investigate this question and don't ask me anything about where it might. So you have to have some hypothesis of why that might be interesting, whether it's curiosity driven or whether it's application oriented. And so I think you do need to have some sense of where it'll take you. You may not know fully where it'll take you, but if you don't know why you're doing it, then you're in real trouble.
So along similar lines, if we look at the literature on knowledge production, there's a lot of finding on how you cannot prejudge, because if the goal is, applied or pure, the production of knowledge in the sense that the researcher has identified a gap in the existing knowledge or in the application and is making an effort to address a gap. If that is not clear, then there's that, it's like an asking question. But everything cannot be predetermined, so it has to be at the level of hypotheses. But but we do not yet have a research ecosystem at the school level or the university level or the funder level which does enough risk taking. We hear a lot of talk about how we should take risks, but when it comes to funding research, particularly by academia, there is a huge amount of risk averseness. So that's something we need to work on, because research always will have, all good research has come out of not knowing where it's going to lead you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to take it from there to Shipra, to you, who's actually part of a system that does take these kind of decisions about, for example, the thematic areas that the principal scientific advisor might focus on, which drives so much. It drives research funding, it drives collaborations, it drives international partnerships, and you're part of an ecosystem that is taking some of the decisions that Ambuj and Ananya were talking about, that's the framework within which they have to operate, right, on it. And from the PSA's office and from DST, there are themes that are supported more than others. Now, typically those decisions are taken not by the researchers who are going to be researching those, right, on it. So there's a disconnect between the fundamental questions sometimes being asked, as Ambuj said, and the thematic areas that might be decided for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in advance. Now, how does that balance take place?
Excellent question, Shashank. And just to build on what Ananya was saying, couple of reminders for all of us. Firstly, as a nation, we are abysmal at spending on R&D, right? So if you compare us with the global average would be somewhere around 3% at least, and the better countries spend, close to 5% of the GDP. We are less than 0.7%, right? Again, if you break that down, right? In more mature countries where you see science and technology leading the economic advancement, you see more private participation. In our country, again, what we frame as R&D spend, that comes from mainly government sources. The private participation is very, very limited. So this is the context in which we are operating, right? So once we are aware of this, and then I'll come to the science and technology clusters, because you touched upon their role, right? So why these science and technology clusters were created? Again, our role is, if you talk in the wider context, is very, very limited, right? So whilst there are 7 science and technology clusters spread across the country that have been created by the PSA office, but this is the experiment that the PSA office has just started. If you look at the clusters overseas, right, they have been there for 30, 40 years, and there are many success stories. Of course, Silicon Valley is the biggest example, but then there are other smaller clusters. You were talking about Cambridge. Look at the Cambridge cluster, Oxford cluster, right? The model there is very, very different, or rather the nation functions very, very differently from what we do, right? So therefore, this is an experiment in a context which is very, very chaotic. The mandate with which we have been established, and we've just completed 3 years, so again, we are fairly new in the system, is to create an ecosystem of industry, academia, government bodies. Earlier, we used to say to take innovations from lab to market, but the new mandate is to take the pilots to plants, right? So again, focusing entirely on translational research rather than the R&D component of it, right? When you talk about the thematic areas where researchers would have a limited say, so this itself limits the scope of thematic areas where we can get involved in, because if you're focusing on translational research, we will be more industry driven and demand driven rather than where the researchers want to expand their knowledge base or frontier research, right? So that itself kind of limits the circle. In terms of again, because we are a central government agency, so we have to focus on national missions, right? There is no escape from there. And given that the government's commitment is towards, boosting the economy, so what are the, levers that S&T can drive to boost that economy, plus the commitment to SDG goals, right? We can't steer away from that. So we have to focus on that. So, given those kind of boundaries within which we operate, Drive as a cluster has taken up a few thematic areas that were kind of top driven, which are now evolving into clearly, two buckets. One is clean energy transition, and the other is environmental sustainability. Now, as I reminded you that because we are a central government agency, so we have to cater to, the demands of the government, the PSUs, etc. So the fresh demands we are getting are from much larger PSUs, for example, in the aviation sector, for example, in the defense sector, primarily because of the, the geopolitical politics or whatever, they've seen the breakdown of the supply chain, etc. So now, again, the question, that is there in everybody's mind, we have such a strong base of researchers, or such a knowledge base, not just researchers, but startups, MSMEs, corporates, PSUs. Can we indigenize some of those things that we've been struggling with and for which we have been relying, on other countries? So that is one driving question, which will ultimately trickle down to the things we pick up and take forward. That is one. Second thing is a bigger problem is of scaling up, right? So right now, whatever said and done, so although, all good institutes have their own technology transfer units, right? But if you look at the statistics, what percentages of those technologies actually make it to the market? So one is, those getting transferred to the corporate sector or to the PSUs, and quite another for them to make it to the daily lives of individuals, right? So again, focusing on that, can we create such an ecosystem where such partnerships can drive and bring technologies into the daily lives? I'll give you one example. For example, EV is, from the clean energy transition, that is, one area we picked up. So right from the, process of developing two-wheelers to four-wheelers fast chargers, utilizing the expertise that we have at IIT, utilizing the lab facilities that we have, connecting with the startups there to kind of develop and take the product with to the market, plus, working with the PSUs, IOCL, HPCL, etc., to commercializing it now, those chargers develop that are there in 19 plus cities across India, right? Plus, taking it forward in terms of engagement with the OEMs, for example, MG Motors, right? So how do we take things forward? Plus, in terms of adoption, okay, so it's one thing you have developed, fast chargers for the country, but then EV will remain non-green till you actually solarize it or use another alternative primary source, green source of energy. So how do you, solarize it and ensure that it gets adopted in the system? So again, where the cluster comes in is engagement with local government bodies. For example, we are working with Delhi Transport to ensure that that system gets inducted into their depots, and part of the buses actually, get green EVs, EV charging facility. Going to other remote governments like J&K and other mountainous regions where the same system can be used completely off-grid and not just solve for mobility but also solve for energy storage. So this is the kind of value chain that the cluster envisages to create in multiple thematic areas.
So I'm just going to pick on what Shipra said in terms of, so that in a sense also is the conflict, right, on it. Isn't that also the conflict about application versus the purity of research on one side? Now, if you've got a young researcher who's entering their career and they say, we want to research on something, right? Now, do they need to guide their career based on very important national priorities, right, on it? Yes, if they want to get the funding, if they want to be tied to an academic who has received funding, etc., etc. On the other hand, where does that leave the originality of thought of an idea, right, on it? Mm-hmm. Is that losing its space, right? And in a sense, that's the central theme of what we're trying to discuss today, is that the very important reasons why clusters like this are set up, right, not just in India, but anywhere else in the world as well, right? And the purer desire to create knowledge for its own sake that Ambujit, you talked about, right, on it. Now, are the power structures somewhere there in conflict right? And how do we retain the ability to create pure knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? Because we don't know where that knowledge may be required later in the future. Right? Any thoughts from you guys?
Well, lots of thoughts, because you packed in a lot in that. So you promised that there would be no binaries. So I don't know that we need to think of, research that is curiosity driven versus research that immediately finds a solution are such irreconcilable binaries, right? So, and even the example of this of the philosopher. Well, philosophy is the basis of law. Philosophy is the basis of politics. I cannot say that, and this is a fight I love to have with engineers. I cannot necessarily say that philosophy is less impactful than the work of any profession. In any applied profession. So I wouldn't like to have that binary, but I would like to say that like in everything, because resources are not unlimited, we would have to balance between different kinds of needs of research. But if we tell a student that go in this direction because there is funding, there is no guarantee that that person will be a successful researcher, because that may have nothing to do with what that student is interested in, can provide or perform. So that wouldn't be a good way to channelize research. But on the other hand, we have genuine constraints. So we do have to find more ways to address those constraints, but the path would not be guiding particular students to whatever is available. Yeah.
I mean, we could go on, but I'm mindful of the fact that Shobhini has not had a chance to
She's going to come in
say
very
anything
soon.
yet.
Yeah.
All right, okay. I don't want us to just hog the mics. My two ways to think about this again. One is for, let's say, you said a young faculty member, right, or any young researcher. In the end, look, as I said, they're in academia for a reason, and it's important for them to follow what excites them, what their passion is. Because if there's no passion and there's no excitement, there really is no success in research, right? So first of all, I think people have to be true to themselves and understand what is it that they would like to chase. What are the questions that they find important? Of course, having said that, you cannot not, at least for many kinds of research, you do need some funding. And now on the other side, I think if you're saying, should you align yourself to, let's say, national priorities, one hopes that national priorities have come out of a process that decides where is it that public investments should be made, right? And I'm assuming you're talking about public funds, right?
Yep.
So in a sense, public funds are intended to, for research, intended to generate knowledge in areas that have some public benefit. The public benefit just may be knowledge, for knowledge's sake, or knowledge that addresses some kind of societal challenges or societal aspirations. If you have the right kind of public policy that helps you determine those priorities through some kind of a process, public engagement, expert engagement and all of that, that hopefully then does avoid to some extent, or to maybe significant extent if you do it right, the conflict between researchers chasing important questions or what they think are important and interesting questions, and public policy actually funding that kind of stuff. In any case, we do know that especially the role of government is partly also to take risk, right? I mean, industry won't always do that because they're thinking very often about the returns to their investment. But the government should and does, at least most parts of the world, does invest in supporting advancement of knowledge that may not necessarily have that exact one-to-one linkages between that investment and a particular kind of outcome. So in other words, I think good public policy that thinks about how do you invest public funds should keep that in mind, that actually even from the point of view of public benefit, short term and long term, you have to have a portfolio of funding available, and then for researchers to actually think about how that might align with them. Although there are examples of researchers who have been able to move along with shoestring and said, I'm not going to chase the funding, and over time have been able to make big investments. Actually, COVID, that was a classic example. You know, one of the women who's behind the mRNA was working at Penn, was not getting funding, but she was saying, I think it's really important, and somehow or the other, I am going to go after it. She was lucky that she had a supporter colleague who basically was able to divert some funds to her, and they ended up working on that. It ended up becoming a huge thing, right? So there are examples of researchers who don't necessarily chase the funds, and there are examples in this case of where the funders didn't think that this was important. So you may not always have that alignment, but hopefully if you're doing it right, and that's why I come back to public policy, if you do it right, you are able to make sure that alignment happens as much as possible. That, by the way, was the rationale for setting up the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi. We said, this is the kind of area in which you do need more analytical, evidence-based, and academic kind of inputs, so that over time we can actually be making better decisions. And I want to just end with one thing: better decision making. There is no single optimal, right? So in the end, it's not that we are doing things wrong today, or we know how to do things perfectly in the future. But the point is, you've got to learn how to do better, learn from other countries which have a longer history of making these kind of decisions on S&T funding. And I'm focusing right now on science and technology, but not all funding has to be necessarily science and technology. It can be humanities, social sciences, and all of that, but different countries have had different models. You can learn from that as to how they're funding, what's worked, what's not. You have to think about what's been working in the Indian context and what kind of institutional histories are, and then use that knowledge and research in public policy to think about how to invest better on research for researchers and for the country. Sorry, that was a slightly long-winded answer.
No, not at all. No, I'm going to pick up on a few of those things, but this is the time now to bring in Shobhini, right, on it. Because Shobhini, you've, you know where I'm going with this, because you've led a very interesting organization that has been the interplay of research and application and back into research, and there is no point at which you can really define where the application of JPAL begins and where the research ends, right? It's a constant interflow, and several conversations that we keep having about that interplay between academics, pure research, application, and funding is no longer an issue for JPAL. Right on.
It is very much so.
Very much, yeah.
I'm always looking for funding.
Yeah. But
funding is always important.
Exactly.
Funding is always important. Funding is a massive issue for JPAL. Don't get me wrong, but yeah.
I will send you my funding campaign.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. But you've also had tremendous impact, right, on it in applying very specific techniques which have been wildly successful in evidence-based research. And it has fed back into research, right? And it has fed back into something that made you very prominent with the Nobel Prize and things. So you've actually seen this interplay of application and research not being just a one-way traffic of something is researched, something is discovered, and then it's applied, right? But it's kind of like an back and forth. Yeah. Which is happening, right? And how do your experiences add to perhaps a different model of how higher education can work with public policy and research and application, where it doesn't have to be just one-way traffic?
Yeah, great question, Shashank. So I think I'll preface what I'm about to say by a few things. Firstly, I'm not an academic. I would love to be one, but I'm not. That elusive pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that PhD never happened. I tried many times to think about it, but I didn't have a burning question, so to speak. I had many questions, but not one burning question which I thought I would dedicate my life to at that point of time. But having said that, I did dedicate 10 precious months of my life watching a stove dry, cook stove dry, mud cook stove dry, and I was like, what are these crazy academics doing? Why as a research associate do I have to spend 10 months in Orissa watching a cook stove dry? And I think to your point, it was a very important question for the researchers. What they were trying to do was they were looking at cook stoves and looking at the health impacts of using improved cook stoves on of course the health of the women and children, as opposed to the traditional cook stoves. I think what we realized at that point of time, very important lessons we learned. One was the reason it was important to watch the cook stove dry, which I thought was a crazy idea, was just the opportunity cost of that stove. So when you have these mud stoves, you just pretty much dig a ditch in the ground. You take a long pipe, you throw big logs of wood, take a long pipe, you blow into it, and there you have your fire. You put big pots of steel pots. You put thick parboiled rice, which most of the villagers used to eat in Orissa, and is all across the southwestern belt where I used to work. And then you would get your food, go back into the fields and start working. But what these improved cook stoves did was you had to make that cook stove. Then you had to watch it for many hours for it to dry, wait for it to dry. Taking away from, you have to protect it from the cows who would break the cook stove, protect it from kids who were playing in the neighborhood, in the villages. Then once the cook stove was done, then I'm getting somewhere with my point. Then you would take big logs of wood from the villages, from the forest. You would bring it, you would cut it into small little pieces, and then shove it into the tiny little holes that the cook stoves had. Then you had smaller pots for the smaller holes, less fire, less heat, takes more time to for the parboiled rice to cook. So people just spent half their time just managing that cook stove and not being in the fields to work. So it did not need a very scientific and very expensive randomized controlled trial to tell you that there is not going to be any health impacts of these cook stoves on the health of the families, and the women and children, especially because the women were using the cook stoves and the kids were milling around their mothers. But having said that, I think the important lessons here that we learned was this iterative process. And what we also and we were very unpopular at that point of time. We were telling people cook stoves don't work, but then there was this one, international cook stoves committee or something that said, we have to take cook stoves to the rest of the world. So I think that's where what we were learning.
Like the sewing machines.
Like the sewing machine.
Like the sewing machine.
Like the sewing
machine. So anyway, so I think there's a lot of tension between application with what the research. So the research doesn't always find what you want it to find. You might have a question, but it might be contrary to that question. So I think it's very important. We've been talking about the inquiry, we're talking about knowledge. I think it's very important to understand what is that question that you want to ask. Yes, it's the health impacts, but you want to put it in the context within which that entire research has been set, and that's what we were trying to do with the field trials that we were doing. And it sort of led to a body of knowledge for us, at least, saying, technology is not a silver bullet. And then there are many things. Whether you're looking at tech, you're looking at smart classrooms, laptops. These are cook stoves 3.0 in a way, because you're giving a product, but you're not really looking at human behavior. You're not putting it in the context, right? So no matter what the method of inquiry is, it's very important to be able to put it in that context, the questions you're asking, and thinking through what is that give and take, that push and pull that you have. Now I have digressed. I have forgotten the question you asked me.
The question I asked was the interplay between research and application.
So now
and you were getting there.
Yeah, I'm getting there. So I'll give you another example where I would, we've been talking about how when you think about national priorities and how national priorities can dictate the kind of research that you do or inquiry that you will have in the future. But I want to talk about the other way around. So again, very early on, and I've used to work with Pratham, which is a very large education NGO for 7-8 years, and then I studied at LSE and I came to JPAL, and we've been here for quite a while now. Through Pratham and then through my early years in JPAL, we are working on this pedagogy, which was a foundation literacy pedagogy. Understanding whether kids can read in a very short period of time. But that pedagogy was not that was almost like a eureka moment for the researchers to arrive at the pedagogy. What they were very early on, and you talked about the Nobel Prize, you had the 3 researchers who got the Nobel Prize actually were working in early 90s, 1990, late 90s, early 2000s. They were working in literally bouncing around as 30-year-old somethings in the villages of Gujarat, in Maharashtra, in Bihar, trying to understand why kids are not learning. And they said, okay, let's give textbooks, let's give flip charts, get more teachers. So, for instance, class sizes in India are very large, 60 to 100 kids to a class. Is that divide the class size in half, or have 2 teachers, 1 teacher with 50 kids, or 1 teacher even with 25 kids. So they tried many different individual randomized evaluations, and randomized evaluations take time. It'll for any learning to impact, you will take 60 days, 30, 90 days, maybe even an academic year. So they dedicated the first couple of years of their lives to understanding why kids are not learning, and they realized that flip charts are not working, uniforms and textbooks are not working, the laptops are not working, just giving an extra teacher and reducing the class size wasn't working. So then they said, okay, there's something else that's happening, and what is that? So that is where there was a lot of conversation with NGO called Pratham at that point of time, and they worked with governments, they worked with Pratham, and they said there's something else that's within the classroom that we are missing. And what they realized that what they're missing was actually just the pedagogy and tracking the level of how the child was engaging with the curriculum and the textbooks. So said, okay, what do we take away textbooks? What do we take away the pressure of teachers, the pressure of teaching from teachers, the pressure of finishing the curriculum at the end of the academic year? So let's see if we can just forget about that, give the teachers one aim. In 30 days, 45 days, kids have to be up to grade level. This is an innovative play-based methodology, pedagogy, very simple learning materials. Let's see how kids engage. And they actually created groups of children. Now this is, you can decide whether you like this or not, but for 1 hour a day, they said, let's group the kids by their ability level. So kids who are reading words were grouped in one group, kids who were beginners, they were in another group, kids who were engaging, who could read fluently in one group. So literally 1 hour, you take kids out of the classrooms, grades 3, and the model has gone through many iterations. But now the model is essentially, instead of pulling out the bottom 20% of the class, you take kids across 3 grades, grades 3, 4, and 5. That's where you need this foundational, because you see that they're lagging behind, and then you put them in these groups where grade 3 is sitting with a grade 5, but they are at the same ability level, and all of your pedagogy is literally aimed at teaching to the ability levels of the child. What we saw was within 20 days, 40 days, and 60 days, the kids were at grade level. And this is just 1 hour a day, and the rest of the time they were doing whatever they were doing in the classrooms. The fact that you bring them up to grade level, they're able to read, they were being able to engage with the curriculum a lot more. Mm-hmm. So they could read the textbooks for the first time in grade 3 and grade 4. Now, fast forward this to, 2-3 years ago, I forget now when the National Education Policy draft had come out, for the first time, and I felt this was like an achievement for many people who in that field who would engaged in the research, plus in Pratham, plus in the ecosystem, in the education ecosystem. It was actually a win for everyone, because there was, for the first time since our independence, there was one line which said in the NEP draft, quality education. Ensure that every child has quality education. The word quality came for the first time. Earlier they were saying children in school. So there was a lot of focus on attendance, a lot of focus on getting kids into school, but zero focus on quality. And I feel that, I'm not saying that this is the culmination of what we did, but this was 15 years of research and iterative research over and over again, and also understanding what's the best model of delivery. We have this pedagogy, but we need to be able to implement it in classrooms with government school teachers. We need to implement it. So we found fantastic success in the communities with village volunteers. Of course, no surprises. But when it came to schools, there was a lot of iteration again. Bihar, Uttarakhand, Haryana. I think there's the 3 states where we actually did a bunch of series of RCTs. Some places it worked, some places it didn't work. Some models worked, some models didn't work. And finally, we had these 2 models, a community model and a teacher-led model, that finally worked. Many state governments are now adopting this model. It's become a part and parcel of their curriculum, and they're adapting it and adopting it. So I think this is, to your point, I think there's a lot of iteration that had to happen as a part of this. And these research at that point of time, today, in fact, this was one of the seminal pieces called Teaching at the Right Level, which was mentioned in the Nobel Prize as one of the key citations. But I think this whole, and they didn't have they had one question, but they had a series of follow-up questions as to understand and unpack why things didn't work, which led us to where we were.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it from there in a word that has been used by all 4 of you in different contexts. You've said, good, effective, quality, etc., right? There's a kind of general understanding that in this entire process of academia, research, application, policy, right, there has to be goodness somewhere. It has to be of a certain quality, right, on it. Effective public policy, good research, you know. So whichever word we use for that quality standard, right, on it, without trying to apply a particular word to that quality standard, I think there's a general understanding amongst the four of you that it's not just anything that you do that is good enough, just the practice of academia doesn't make it quality or good, right, on it. There have to be some standards of some kind which determine whether the quality of public debate, the quality of the field trials that you do, the quality of evidence, the quality of the partnerships that lead to something effective, right, on it. And so if I can just pivot us for a few minutes on looking at, right, how do we know, right, what quality is? Is it just something that when we see it, we know it, right, on it? Or how do we talk about what's good higher education, what's good research, what's good public policy led by research, right? So I'm going to ask all four of you to just react to that. I mean, is it just, oh my God, I can't define it, but I know it, right on? Or can you actually start unpicking that?
Okay. Who do you want to start with?
Anybody who's ready to go.
I'll take a step because it is the question in a way that that defines our daily work. Are we fostering quality, or are we just doing something for the sake of doing it? And how do we differentiate? But one thing I will say, in terms of the name, the title of the panel, as in Rethinking Academia. So precisely around this question of quality and impact, of course, academia needs to think about its relevance, how we do things, why we do things, what is the purpose, and who does it serve. But on the other hand, I think society also needs to think about academia, rethink academia also. Because I find it's become very fashionable to say that whatever happens in academia is useless, this is abstract research. Everything that is advancing society lies in either in industry or somewhere else outside of academia, because we are so, one is the abstraction, but the other is we are so outdated almost. But this is where a real understanding and maybe a reinforcing what academic research should do needs to be discussed. So the value of academic research, I would say, whatever field, is first of all in identifying that gap, whether it's applied or basic, that where is knowledge today on whatever is the topic, and where is that key question? That has to be done through that academic process of assessment and distancing yourself from an immediate result, right? The focus is on the question. The second is on the method. That academic research is not Google search. I don't know how many people say that while I was researching, what it means is I was looking up a few sites. That is not research. That is looking up Google, looking up
now
the
it's ChatGPT.
Yeah, I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said XYZ. Okay, I'm happy that it did so, but that is not academic research. That is not research which follows and there is even so much work done on research method itself. Or anybody who's gone through the pain of a PhD knows that the research method itself is a question, right? You toil hours and hours thinking what is the correct research method, and you're intimidated to go to your supervisor who will say your method is all wrong, right? So, but that is the value, that you have identified a question with a gap, you have identified a a method which you can justify, and then you will have an outcome which you will have to stand by in the face of critique. That is what a PhD defense is about. You have to stand by it in the face of critique and acknowledge where you have gone wrong. And with it is another very, very important quality, which is humility. And I mean humility in a very specific sense. If you are a true academic, at least in my mind, then the first thing you've done is identified the limitations of what your work will be able to produce, and what you will not be able to produce, what questions you will not be able to answer. So what you produce and the knowledge with which you proceed is contextualized within a broader understanding of the knowledge in that field. So that gives you a kind of humility, or should give you a kind of humility, which is a very important part of being an academic, that I know what I don't know or what I have not been able to do. Now, if these qualities of curiosity, that is asking the question, the normative justification of why I'm doing and with what method, and the humility of what I could do and what I cannot do, this is what academic research is about. And so to dismiss this by saying that, your work has become redundant because ChatGPT can answer my 3 questions in 40 seconds, or maybe less, is a fundamental misunderstanding of what academia is about. Now, whose fault is that? To a large extent, it's the fault of academia, because we have lost sight of these values also. And this kind of trifecta, or what that I was describing, needs to be actually there from school education. It cannot happen just at the PhD level. We have not worked on that ecosystem. We are not trying to create that scientific temperament with humility. So I think, in that, what is quality research? Even before that, I would want to see, or quality academia, I would say that we need to create this ecosystem which has this basis. These would then engender quality, and as true academics, we would debate to death what quality is. But that is the purpose of academia.
So can I jump in here if you don't mind? I hire from academia. I hire from exactly the institutions that you're talking about, and we have first-hand knowledge of quality, for that matter. So we hire across South Asia, JPAL South Asia. We have about 200 staff right now worldwide, and we work with more than 800. We have 200 staff in India on our payrolls, about 500 worldwide and across all our offices. I'm talking about India now, but we work with a network of more than 800 researchers worldwide. When we started out in 2000, I joined in 2007. When we started out at that point of time, we had pretty much till maybe, I can even say 5 years ago, we didn't have a single Indian academic based in an Indian institution that we were really working with very closely. They could have been co-PIs or co-authors together with our network of researchers, but we didn't really have that network of Indian academics. And it's not by design or by choice. We just did not find Indian academics who were engaged or were interested in doing rigorous research, doing randomized controlled trials, field trials with us. We just did not find that cohort. I have no idea why or what and how. Given the fact that we had a lot of Indian researchers, researchers of Indian origin working in the US would come, and the UK would come to India and work on field projects. We also hire students who finished their masters in India, who have finished Indian masters. We hired quite a few of these students. I would say 50% or 60% of our batch have all Indian master's degrees. Now, I'll say a few things about. So I'm not saying. It's not a. It is a reflection actually. I wouldn't say not a reflection, but it's probably a reflection of higher education in India. The students who have been trained in higher education institutions in India, they do not come as rigorously trained as students who have a degree from an Ivy League college or even a non-Ivy League college in the US, Europe, or UK. And I have now 10 years or 15 years of data to be able to show that to you, recruitment data to show that to you, to prove my point. Maybe they may not. I don't know.
Didn't exist in 2007. Yeah.
No, and I think that's one problem statement that we have. And so what are we doing? It's not a problem statement, it's just a fact. So we spend a lot of time actually in-house training students on the technical rigor, and we are committed to that, and we do that. So we have training programs where we train them on R and Stata. We've got smaller batches who want to do Python, but we train them in data sciences. We've got some scholarships that are now we've got some external things that we're doing with other partners. So there's a lot of effort from our end to be able to also sort of give the right kind of skills to people when they join, or whenever they, on an average, I think 30% of these youngsters move on to other jobs as well. So they go with these skills. Now coming to working with academia, and you mentioned that you have to defend a PhD thesis, and then so in the last 3 or 4 years, the South Asia office, we made a concerted effort to actually work with Indian academics through collaborative research projects. And it's not just as co-PIs, but they were the sole authors on the research. So we managed to raise, and we've got colleagues in this room who successfully raised money from Gates Foundation, from IKEA, from I don't know where, Global Innovations Fund, to be able to carve aside $200,000 in total to be able to fund research done by Indian academics from Indian institutions. So far, we've worked with about maybe a cohort of 40 Indian academics from Indian institutions. These institutions have been, IIT Delhi, for instance. It's not been Shiv Nadar University, but IIT Delhi. We've had researchers from Christ University, from IIT Bombay, from ISI, JNU. Did I say Christ University? What are the institutions? IIT Kanpur. I'm Bangalore, Kriya University. So it's been a big range of Ahmedabad University. So it's a big range across India, and we've chosen the proposals based. So we were essentially taking that pot of money from Gates or whoever, and then we were awarding that. We were running competitions, and they all applied. So we've had 2 rounds of these applications, and we worked with about 40 researchers, but in teams. So in teams of say 5 or 6 teams of researchers, and all of them Indian researchers from Indian institutions. I think there are 2-3 things that we found. Firstly, the fact that the ideas were fantastic. So it goes without saying that we're talking about knowledge creation. You were talking about influencing public policy. So the kind of topics were so specific. So there was a researcher from Ahmedabad University working on the impact of X and Y chromosome on women's agency. There was somebody working on cool rooftops and energy consumption in Kerala. Somebody mapping dengue and climate correlations in Kerala or something. So I think they've been very specific, and it's also from trying to give back to research from a very purposive angle. Given the fact that we work with governments, we were able to connect these researchers also to partners, government partners, because what you're doing is then you're influencing what is studied, how it is studied. You're influencing policy in India through the research that Indian academics are doing. The 2-3 things, I want to say two points here. One point is that what we found was I think the ideas were great, but most of these academics we worked with had zero field knowledge. Zero field application, zero field knowledge. And they were about between 5 to 8 years after having done their PhD, they were actually assistant professors in these universities, had not had any field experience. So a lot of our time was spent in trying, and they are academics in their own right. So you can't go and say, I'm going to train you on field processes. That's an insult. So what we just did webinars. And we put some of our best managers on their projects to be able to, and it was really appreciated by them. In terms, how do you run a survey in the field? How do you, manage your field team? Our managers were doing all of that, but I think they really appreciated the fact that they had that support and the infrastructure that GPAL was providing to be able to run their field research on the ground, and they were able to sort of learn from, and they actually they were just equal partners with the research managers, or 25-year-olds in the field who were also managing the research for them, and there was a really good collaboration, and many of them have come back now, are working on second and third projects with us. Some of them have been scoping studies, some of them have moved from scoping studies to an RCTs. I don't think we've done more than 5 or 6 RCTs. Again, the appetite for RCTs hasn't been as big, but I think but the appetite for actually getting their hands and feet dirty in the field with that has been really good. The second gap that we found was just the fact that many of these academics, and I would say 70% of them had Indian PhDs, these academics we worked with, and they had never written a grant proposal. 20 to 30% had never written a grant proposal ever. So even the proposals that were coming to us were very poor quality proposals. So we had another webinar on how to write better proposals. And we got really good proposals for returning academics to the second round of second round that we sent of competition that we sent out. So it's a slow process, I think. And then the third gap that we found was just lack of exposure, mentorship opportunities, conferences, having presented in conferences outside of India and having that advisory and peer feedback. That was completely missing as well. So we did a little bit of digging, and this is one place where I'm actually looking for funding, we've now initiated something called an Indian Scholars Program, and it's called many names, shapes and forms, but in the Indian Scholars Program is essentially, we're trying to raise funding for a few things. We're trying to see whether we can support a larger, say, 100 academics in the next 10 years to be able to do rigorous on-field research. It doesn't have to be RCTs. For us, yes, I would love it if there were RCTs, but I think the starting point is to be able to do rigorous field research, and being able to, and what we are trying to do is to connect them, create an ecosystem of institutions, universities which are actually giving the space for Indian academics to do research and to publish. I don't know how, you guys should not shoot me down on this, but I do think that one of the issues that our academics have been talking to us about is that their promotions are not based on how many papers have been published. It's really, it's the teaching hours, it's admin, how much they're putting in some admin support and recruitment and all of those things. So I'm sure it's different from your institutions, but these are, I've given you the names of institutions that we've been working with, and we've been hearing this from them. So I think incentives are not aligned. There's a lot of, unevenness, I think, in the system that needs to be ironed out, and incentives need to be better aligned to be able to do this.
Okay, I'm going to give Ambuj and Shipra a chance to come in on quality. Right? No, I'm actually going to take it to the audience, and I'm going to bring it back to the two of you. Right? You're not off the hook yet, right? But I want you guys get a bit more time to think about this.
I think I'm going to suggest to Shobhini, she does some field research by coming to Indian institutions and seeing how we work. I mean, I must confess, I take great exception to the fact that you're saying faculty members at places like IITs don't write grants.
I'm not talking about IITs.
But you're saying those are the people that you were reaching out to.
One of the people, but this is many other.
Yeah, I mean, no, look, India has had a long history of high quality social science research. My colleagues, I mean, from the social sciences are out in the field routinely. India's had great sociologists, India's had great economists who actually have been out in the field. I think, but to suggest that we don't have these capabilities, I'm sorry, I'm sure there are some. There's no doubt about that. But I think, I do think that, and I don't want to get into a spat here, but since you made some claims that I think as an academic in India, I think I have to say, I think it's really not correct to say that. I am sure there are researchers in India who've not had the kind of training that's required, but there are researchers in the US also. I mean, we can have a side conversation about that cook stove paper. There are actually people working on cook stoves well before those folks came, and their answers were not surprising to anybody who worked in that area. So I think I guess again I don't want to get into that. Because it's been said and it's going to be on YouTube, I just want to make sure that there is a disclaimer to this, right? Anyway, I want to come back to the question of quality, which is where we started from, and somehow wandered in all kinds of directions. How do you think about quality research? I think that's the question you actually asked.
That is the question.
Right? It's a really tough question. It's a really tough question. It's not only a tough question in India, it's a tough question globally. How do you really understand what good research, right? So generally in the world of academia, good quality is seen as basically your assessment by peers, right? Now it objectively sounds very good, but I mean there's been now years of study of the scientific enterprise, science technology studies, and they've shown that basically all kinds of biases creep in, right? People basically, depends on which institutions you're from, depends on what's seen as hot.
Yeah.
And actually people also, in a sense, present things in different ways and all of that. So a real objective assessment of quality becomes extremely difficult. I mean, we struggled with this at IIT, but it's not just, as I said, it's not just an Indian thing. I think so you can now do this assessment in different ways. You can actually say, we're going to make sure that we are going to select, for example, the peer reviewers in terms of trying to bring a little bit of balance into this in the way we think.
Remove some of the biases.
And remove some of the biases. But it's still, I think this really is, in a sense, the $1 million question, right? How do you really understand whether the work is high quality decided by who, in what fashion, and all of that, and that becomes extremely tricky, and therefore that becomes very tricky for, in fact, this whole QS ranking and all this ranking stuff is completely
it's in a sense
living on that, right?
Isn't it?
It's oversimplifying.
It's
right?
oversimplifying.
I mean, I just, for example, I'll give you one classic form is highly cited papers, right? How many highly cited papers? In fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about this, right? If you look at the Web of Science, it said that India has 8,000 highly cited papers and the US is 80,000. And we were having a conversation, what does that mean?
Yeah.
How do you translate that into some real understanding of, are we doing good work, are we not doing good work, right? And I think it becomes extremely tricky. I do think maybe one aspect of quality is what stands the test of time, right? It's something that's not just seen as good today, but is continued to seen as good over time by series of researchers, right? It continues to add value to other people, whether it's foundational or work that other people are building on and so on. Maybe that's one dimension of quality, but it's not, again, it's not something that you can measure instantly when the paper comes out, right? It's one of these things that, one of my favorite sayings by Kierkegaard is, life is lived forwards but best understood backwards, right? I think it's the same of research, right? Research is done forwards, but actually the value of the research is often best understood backwards, right? So I can retrospectively go back and tell you, this was the kind of dimension of quality, but at that moment I think it becomes very difficult. But I think it really is an extremely difficult question to answer.
Shipra, I'm going to get you in and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So
thank you so much. Thank you. Shashank, because so many experts have already spoken about it, so I'll introduce a very different angle, and bearing in mind that I'm wearing the PSA S&T cluster hat, I'll bring that perspective also. I think before we ask the question, what is good quality, I think we should also think about why, right? Now, a lot of people would have heard about competitive advantage, but there's something that is taught in MBA classes is comparative advantage, right? So a lot of people would be good at many things, but it's smart thinking to identify where you have a comparative advantage, right? Why am I talking about this? Because many a times, instead of doing our own research and creating our own innovation, we have to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel, and if there is a smarter way to take tech transfer from, research, wonderful research that has been, done abroad. Why are we not considering it? Professor Sagar, raised a very, very relevant point that we are talking about public money. What is the process that decides where that public money is spent, right? And somebody sitting in that position has to ask themselves that, okay, so we are looking at solutions, for example, carbon capture, right? If something else exists abroad that is working very well, why do I have to spend our public money in funding research, in reinventing the wheel, and coming up with a suboptimal solution, whereas it'll be a lot cheaper to import that technology, right? That is one example. Shobhani was talking about this pedagogy thing, right? Again, just taking that example because it was discussed, somebody sitting at that level could ask, okay, so there are so many IB schools existing in India, right? They have this immersive learning approach. Why don't you just copy paste their curriculum? Why do you have to spend, 10 years worth of your time experimenting in classrooms and coming up with the same things and same pedagogical approach, which is already there right in front of you, right? So one is vantage point, which I wanted to, bring to the discussion. Second is, impact. Again, quality of research may be very good, but if it is not applied at scale, it will not drive that research. For example, one of the initiatives we are involved in is Yamuna cleaning. Right? Now, everybody knows what the problem is with Yamuna. It's a 20-kilometer stretch that runs through Delhi and contributes 80% of the pollution, right? Yamuna is very clean when it enters Delhi, or maybe a little bit further up, right? But when it enters Delhi, most of the pollution, 80% of the pollution, is caused primarily by industrial effluents, right? Now, it's not unknown, information. It's there in public domain. What are we doing to treat those? There are 4 large drains that go into the river, right? Now there are multiple things. There are policy issues. There are, other areas, encroachment, etc., which lies outside the purview of science and technology. But again, what are the S&T solutions that are technologically feasible and that are commercially viable that will help address that problem? Right now, I've been scouting for these solutions. Neither have I found those in the academia, nor with startups, nor with large industries that are sitting out there, right? So again, when we talk about quality and talk about impact, we have to ask these very, very basic questions and see, why we are doing these things. So these are my 2 cents.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the panel, right? But I wanted to take some questions from the floor, right? On it, gentleman here has a question. Just the mic so that others can hear you as well.
I am very new to this, but I'd just like to ask academia and research. We are doing fantastic research in science and technology, and I keep on hearing it all the time or reading it in the papers. But what about the things that are broken in our country for decades? For example, the judicial system. We take 20 years to solve a court case. Is there any academia role or research role in that? For example, the students who pass out from school or undergraduate levels, they don't even understand anything that is required in the practical world. They're taught nothing about it, right? Third, corruption, for example. That's been our biggest problem in our country for the longest time. But does academia and research write any research papers on how to solve corruption problems? It impacts 100 crore people in this country. But I have never seen a research paper on corruption, for example, or the judicial system. So I don't know whether it's only about science and technology and about philosophy and about everything else, but not about the fundamental questions that affect every Indian's life.
So I have to answer.
I'm going to, after that, bring it to
Can I just come in
Ambuj
for
as
1
well.
second?
Let's just get back to the panel. Is it an add-on to
Yes,
what he
it
said?
is.
Yeah, okay.
It's an add-on, as in I totally agree with what Samir said. I want to say, is India awarding too many PhDs? Because the same problems that he talks about in terms of quality, etc., is something that I have encountered very recently, and it's made me think. And therefore, I kind of agree with the point that Shobhani made, that maybe we're just giving out too many. I don't want to generalize, education in India is fantastic. I'm a product, I've worked here, studied here, whatever. But just to make the conversation and the debate more interesting, tying up with what Samir raised.
Okay, so I'm going to take it to Ananya first, and then I want to bring Ambuj into this.
So, on the question of, are there studies on the big societal questions? There absolutely are. As if I say we when I mean social scientists, non-STEM. This is a new word I've learned after returning to India, that I'm in the non-STEM category. So the non-STEM category is not that good at getting the media excited about this kind of publication. So and I think I accept that is when the academia's voice and impact of impacting some of these big problems where research is happening. Sometimes the research is not of great quality, whatever standard you apply, but sometimes there's very good research which is not being translated, is not coming into the world of public policy. And that is a separate question from the quality of research, but an absolutely key question of our times. This is what we worry about in a place like Shivnadar all the time, is that how could we publicize more the social science research? Because in Scopus, for example, out of 42,000 journals, Scopus is this index which everybody uses for ranking. Most of it is STEM. That doesn't mean there's no non-STEM place, but I think the social science and humanities need to be more cognizant about the impact they need to make, whether it's corruption, whether it's gender, whether it's climate change, whatever. So that I absolutely accept that that's a problem, but the research is there, and this is unfortunate that it's not being publicized in the way that it should. On the question of awarding too many PhDs, of course, here I would say not enough. Not enough in the sense that I know where you say when you're too many, you mean that the too many are not quality PhDs who are not trained. That may be true, but we cannot, because we are failing in quality in some ways, we cannot say that we don't want that many PhDs. It's not like we would achieve quality by reducing quantity. So quality is a whole different project that I was saying, that it needs to be built in many different ways, that we need to establish quality. But we are in need of PhD students. And I'll tell you why. I am a great believer that in India, India's a site of knowledge, should be a lot more, a site of knowledge production about a lot more of the global problems. And that cannot happen if our young students, young faculty members, PhDs, postdocs, assistant professors are not involved in research, right? So I would say we need more quality, and we need to build the ecosystem more to have that. And I also feel that there is a lot of talent. There are a lot of questions, but not all students are do not have the privilege to pursue the PhD question that they have in the way they need, because if it's in science, labs are not available everywhere. If it's in the social sciences, a lot of books, journals, there's a lot of systemic barriers. But it should be a national mission, I would think, to have more and more quality PhD.
I'm just going to ask you to comment on one aspect of it, Ambuj, because the chair you hold and the school you founded at IIT, read on it, looks at public policy. So I think inherent in what Samir was asking, the question he was asking, was about really three things: public policy, right? Public engagement, right? And public understanding of the issues, right? On it. And I think these are all three things that you in your work and in your school are grappling with. And so if I could put it to you, how can academia, I mean, your school is an academic institution, right, on it. How is academia looking and engaging with these public issues, right, through these lenses?
Yeah, I think it is an important question, of course. But I think let me also add to what Ananya just said. You know, in the social sciences, it's very difficult to give a definitive answer, right? It's not like the physical sciences where over time with research, or natural sciences actually, not just physical sciences, you are able to test cause and effect, right? And you can control variables, and you can basically really hone in on the question you're asking. In the social sciences, it's much more difficult, right? So if one is to ask the question, what underlies, for example, persistent poverty in India, right? There are a lot of factors that contribute to that. Very difficult to give a definitive answer as to what the one or two key factors might be, although you may be able to prioritize. So I think part of it is very often in the policy domain, when people are looking for simple and clear answers, we're not able to do that, and part of it is actually what you said is also communication. How do you communicate your results, and how do you actually engage with policymakers? And part of it is there is not that much, and I think that we do have to blame. I think Indian academics do not engage as much with the outside world as I think they probably should. With public policy, you talk about public engagement, I think we have far fewer public lectures at our universities than we should have. We don't engage as much with industry, we don't engage as much with civil society that I think we should. In some senses, if you want to do knowledge, and I think you used the term impactful earlier, right? And I think it's whatever kind of knowledge you want to generate, it should be impactful. And impact really cannot be understood abstracted from the context, right? And therefore, as academics, I think it is imperative we engage with the outside world in different ways, because that's where we understand what the important questions are. That's where we understand how to best engage with the questions, and that's how we understand how to best communicate our advancements in knowledge, our insights, back to all of these different stakeholders. And I think that engagement really needs to be much more. I think there's no doubt about that's something we, again, I don't know if it was a time when we were doing much more of that, but certainly I think at this point we really need to be more, and to be fair, I think most of our academic institutions have understood this. Yeah. We're making significant efforts to do that kind of engagement in a much more systematic fashion, but I think there's a long way to go.
Long way to go. And another thing is academia also has to learn from what it hears. That is not academia's strength, to actually put out the knowledge that it produces, then learn from the critique from society. That is also something we need to work on.
We're going to take a question from here, then the gentleman there, and then the gentleman at the back.
Hi. I was just wondering, and this may be more of a rhetorical question than anything else, but if you have a thought on this, how important is a higher education that is public and that is well funded and independent for this process?
I'm going to let all four of you react to that.
Should we just take all three questions and then just...
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Can do
that. Right on it. Can we have a question from here, this gentleman here, and then we'll take it at the back.
I am Dr. M.K. Sharma. It's really exciting to be here. I don't know whether I have a question or there are many questions, and I have my peeves with the public policy space, what is happening in India. One example is NEP, and it's supposed to be very promising. What is happening, Professor Ananya brought out that philosophy is not less important, but how many of us, how many of the students at 12th level would opt for STEM? Now it is disrupted, but they will go for engineering, medicine, and blah, blah. And how many of them would actually go into literature, philosophy, social science? how do we motivate? What is the policy space work required so that this is one part, this is one, because you say there are autonomous institutions, but you have a common examination. You say that you can choose your interest and passion to study, but you cannot interview a person who has got even 0.1% less than the cutoff, because the Supreme Court comes and you interview all of them. This dichotomy of word autonomy and then giving some central rulings are the problems which at ground level students are facing. Also, my other problem was when we can cite that, okay, if there are only 80 citations and there are 800 citations, what does it make? I think it makes some difference. How many of the Nobel laureates we had as per population ratio? How many of the inventions that India has? Why Bill Durant doesn't have a chapter on Indian philosophers? My point is that policies are generally made by bureaucrats and some discussion in politicians. There were hardly any discussions on NEP in parliament. I think just once. And what happens, there is this disjoint between this public and policy. You want to have CCE, you can have immersive learning experiences, ma'am. But do you have the teacher to student ratio? You have 68 students per teacher, and you want to have...
Sir, we've got your question. I just want to ask a few more questions. We'll address them with the panel, but
Yes,
can
sir.
I have a question from the gentleman there?
Yeah. My name is Dr. Jagveer Rawat. First, a small comment to Dr. Shipra. Very good 6 clusters you told about. They are being 3 years old, but I want to introduce by the 3 lakh members in one district. And there's a huge clarity about question asking and coming from, like I can give one example. It's about application of embryo transfer technology, cost thereof, that's one. And per kg production of fodder, 2. And also another third one I was myself involved, was discerning the resistance, the antibiotic resistance problem in a very clearly defined with their data. So they had a question how to stop the mastitis. 3 questions I'm telling, they were filtered by themselves. So when we are asking, and they have a rural management institution, organically grown, not like coming from Harvard Business School, we have Indian Institute of Management, and IIT, MIT, IIT. We have IRMA, and it's very successful. And maybe you can see the Manthan film, which is now going back to Cannes this time.
We have some IRMA graduates in this audience as well. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, sir, I'm going to address your
one so one cluster for cooperatives also I'm suggesting to Dr. Shipra.
Thank you.
So please see that homegrown ecosystem, and the quality question is also answered. You see, there are 38 veterinarians in their districts employed by government of Gujarat and 240 by the district milk union. So the quality is, you can see how it goes into jobs. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to I'm going to just take these 3 questions first, because we'll run too far afield with the range of questions that are coming first. So if whoever would like to address any of these 3 issues about crowdsourced quality.
I love the question, so I'll take a stab.
Go ahead.
So on this question of public-private, of course, I think about this a lot. So I spent 27 years in Canada. So in Canada, there's no public, no private. Every university has public funding, and every university has private funding, which is mostly the research funding, although Canada also has the National Research Councils, but they're not as big as in the US or as UK used to be. So in every university, there is both. Is it painful and a lot of tensions at sometimes? Yes. But it is also a synthesis of, as we were discussing, things coming out of public policy through discussion, because it is taxpayer funded, as well as private foundations, research interest. And there were some very strict criteria that even, I mean, this is now a big question, that once the funding comes to the university, there's a lot of distance from what the donor can ask or not ask. So it's a fairly robust system. Is it without its faults? No. And if public funding is decreasing, then it becomes a very vulnerable system. So I would say that, if we could find the right combination, then it probably would be the best solution. Yes, publicly, but adequate amount of public funding for the scale that is required in India. It will happen only if there is a very strong national mission. And I'm coming back to that question. On the question of cooperatives, that's also a failure of social scientists in some way. Many of us have studied movements like cooperatives, but we have not done as much of the translational work as it should. And particularly from India, we have Manthan going to Cannes, but we should have a lot more body of work from India being, owned and disseminated at a global level. So those kinds of things in India are very, there should be leadership from India at the global level. There was a question on, the NEP and autonomy and etc. I agree with you that, autonomy is, there's no straightforward autonomy. But this is a global problem. I described the Canadian model, even the US model, which seems the most autonomous, but we can see so many different issues arising from the university's autonomy. And the reason is, again, going back to rethinking academia. Academia, universities, it all exists in a social context. And we just try to abstract it from the social context and say, let's do this today, let's have this policy today. It doesn't work like that. Academia is one part of society. So that continuous thinking about how society affects academia and how academia can impact society, this reiterative relationship, continuously needs to be worked on.
Okay, quick comment from Shobhini, and then we could get another few questions.
So I have a slightly sort of a more forward-looking approach. I think the question that you asked was, how can we get more students into literature with STEM? I think from the practitioner's point of view, and I'm not talking from the academic point of view, from a practitioner's point of view, one of the things that we are seeing, our research actually we're looking at, is sort of what happens after that. So there will be only that many jobs that you can in STEM, or only that many jobs a philosophy student or a literature student can do. Ultimately, at the end of the road, it's when you are looking at in the universe of people that are coming out and the system is producing, that we are seeing a mismatch in the, and this is not a reflection on literature or STEM, but we are seeing a mismatch in the skills with the skills of the youth, with the aspirations that they have, and with what the industry is asking of them. So, and this mismatch is causing a lot of discontentment. It's causing a lot of friction. I think there is not enough evidence to speak from that point of view, in terms of where are the drop-off points, where are the leakages, how do we stem it at each point. So I'm not answering your question really, but I'm just saying that you have to take I'm putting it in a context of what happens, what next.
Okay, gentleman there.
Actually, for Sobhni ma'am, my question is that you said about engaging student in groups. So what are the difficulty I have faced? I'm a teacher by profession, and I have been teaching in Delhi government school since last 2 years. And what I have seen engaging them into the groups, there are some challenges, and I'm particularly mentioning two things. In engaging student in Delhi, apart from Delhi, Bihar or another state, we are very spectacular, very set frame of mindset that we are getting student from same social value system. Whereas in Delhi, in a classroom, we have different student from different states, not even a state, from different countries as well. In my classroom, we have student from Delhi, apart from Delhi, Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, and even some from Nepal. So, and also we have more than 70 students in a classroom, and we are having 7 class at starts out of 8. So the challenges are, after taking those classes, we are completely exhausted. And the second thing, engaging them into the groups is one of the challenges. They are hardly aware about how to get them into right directions. So the things that you said, engaging them, yes, it obviously sometimes it is fruitful. But after so much classes, we are sort of energy and resources that how to get them into right shape. As we have also.
I'm happy to take this offline.
Yeah. So
one more thing.
Sir, if I can, I would suggest Shobni's offered that your questions are not related to higher education. So what I would say is she's willing to take this offline with you, right on it. But can we address? There's a gentleman at the back with a question. Can we have a mic there, and then we'll take one more question and then get back to the panel.
Despite talking about this so much regarding quality and all, recently you were mentioning about QS ranking. About 2,000 universities institution ranking was published. Our institution FAIR, the first institution which was among the top Indian, is 460. I am Bangalore, I think. Then follows IIT Kanpur, IIT Delhi, 500, 600 something. QS ranking of 2,000 universities and institutions from the US. So why in the first 10 institutions are shared by the same institution every year? Oxford, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, they are sharing repeatedly, alternatively every time. Why our institutions are faring in 400, 600, 500?
Okay, we're going to take one more question, then we'll address your thing. I think let's just have the last question, the lady here, and then I just want to bring it back to the panel.
Hi all, my name is Arza Zakir and I'm a second year undergraduate student at Delhi University. So my question, as one of the gentlemen mentioned here about the NEP, I'm the first, my batch is the first one to write the CUT exam and which the NEP has been implemented. So we are the experimental batch kind of thing. And ever since the NEP has been implemented, there has been the number of papers which we have to study has been increased. And like apart from, I'm doing an honors, but apart from my core papers, we have to study more like value and skill added courses, which is as per the popular opinion of the students, which is of no use. Like apart from the stress and all the hustle bustles of practicals and everything being have, apart from that, nothing is been like the skill and value is not been added. Also regarding our degree being like the graduation has extended to 4 years, we have the option to exit and entry at our 3rd year, but it has been only notified by the UGC, not the DU. DU hasn't like announced any notification regarding the exit and entry options. And there was one of the notification also telling UGC that we have the option to do the research, and after the 4th year research, we can directly enter the UGC NET exam. So all of these being said, apart from they have, the DU hasn't notified or anything, like none of the clarifications has been said. There is a lot of stress and uncertainties that students have been facing because of this NEP. So as a superficial or a NEP being implemented. Apart from that, was there any research or several bureaucrats and educational workers or who works in the educational field sitting here? Is there any comment on the NEP and the uncertainties that being faced by the students? Also, is there any that we can expect any what we say, any benefit of the NEP?
Okay,
also, how this affects the academia of higher education?
Okay. So I'm just going to paraphrase these questions very quickly into, and then just take quick responses from the panel on that. So one, of course, a very quick response on the conversion of policy into practice, right, on it, which is what the lady is actually talking about with the NEP question. But I'm just generalizing it about the conversion of policy into implementation and practice, right, on it. So I'm just generalizing your question there, right, onto that, and just get a response from all of you on that, right. Take a response on the role of rankings and ratings, right, on it, and what do you feel about rankings and ratings, right, on it. And I know universities need to chase it, and if you do well, you publish it on your website, and on it. But I know also that we've had conversations about are they really valuable? So just a quick comment about ratings and rankings in general. And that sort of links back into the quality issue that we were talking about earlier, that our ratings and rankings, the measure of quality, right, in that. Right. And the third thing, if I can get all of you to respond, is what the lady actually also hinted at, is we've talked a lot about research and PhD and that level. Where does the undergraduate education fit into this entire? Is it just feedstock for research later on, right? Or can it be everything to everyone? Can it also lead to industry-ready people, the relevance issue? Can it also lead to feedstock for research, on it? So where does undergraduate fit in? Is it trying to be everything for everyone? So if I could just get quick responses on these. I've paraphrased many of your questions to try and just bring them home. So, Ambuj, if I can begin with you.
Sure, I was about to.
You were about to
write down the questions
and
do some thinking on that. But I think let me start with policy and practice, because I think that really is a big question. The NEP does envisage all of these things. So in a sense, it has good intentions in terms of trying to change or bring different principles into the Indian education system. I think the problem with these kind of things happen is that you basically have a history of doing things in a particular way, and then you are bringing a new set of policies and practices in a very short time. And I think that's where the disjunction that happens, where I think this is going to, it's unfortunately, the early years are the tough ones, where institutions are trying to figure out how to implement the policy, which are the, how to really make it happen in practice. And unfortunately, I think you're caught right in the middle, because this is the time when the transition is happening. Over time, hopefully the institutions will rework themselves. I do think that giving students a little bit more choice probably is good. I didn't study in the standard university system. I actually did my undergraduate at IIT Delhi, which is somewhat different. We're organized somewhat differently in terms of our educational systems, but many of my peers went to Delhi University, and I think it was a fairly rigid way of learning. And I think so certainly more flexibility for student, more options, and how do you think about a little bit of mix and match will be useful. But you're right, in the end, as I say, the devil is in the details. And if you're not implementing it in a way that is where students are feeling the pain, clearly that's not a good way of a good outcome. I want to come back to the question also of this undergraduate education, what are we educating for, and all of that. I think these are questions we really have to grapple much more societally. And this question about why are students going to STEM in preference to non-STEM, I don't think it's public policy. These are actually choices being made by students and their families. I actually see parents involved in decisions made by their children, and it's almost kind of this complicated decision. I mean, parents are asking, what is the pay packet of particular disciplines, right? Now, this is a much bigger issue we are treating education as purely or almost purely being instrumental, rather than actually expanding horizons and turning young people into critical thinkers and engaged, excited people. And I think if you have that, you're kind of, in a sense, quote unquote, industry ready, right? But then industry also needs to be looking for people like that. Instead of thinking it instrumentally, do they have the right skill sets? Can they do this? Can they do that? Rather than, are they able to think well? Are they able to engage with problems in some kind of way? So I think it really is a much more systemic challenge that we have to be thinking about. And it goes back to your point about rethinking academia, right? Rethinking academia is how academic institutions have to understand their role, how they're delivering education, what kind of education they should deliver, how they should deliver it, how they should engage with the outside world, but also the outside world, right? How does it understand the role of academia? How it actually, what its demands from academia, but also in some sense getting a better sense of what academia really should contribute to society. And I think that's a question for academic institutions, that's a question for policymakers, but it also is a question for society much more broadly. And I'll just maybe for a second go to the question of QS rankings, because I don't want to let that go. I don't know if you know how the QS rankings are actually put together, right? The construction of the rankings itself is problematic. What weight do you give to different kinds of elements of the ranking, right? Part of the ranking is asking set of people, what do you think of this institution? So it's almost like a popularity contest, right? How do you think about internationalization? I mean, so these are things that instantly put you at a disadvantage. I'm not saying that Indian institutions be ranked in the top 10. I think that's a different question, but if there's to be ranking, where they should be. But the ranking inherently has some assumptions built into it. And if you really unpack the ranking, you actually understand that it's going to be stacked against Indian institutions. And I think it's a much bigger conversation, but I don't think we should read too much into where our institutions are in this QS ranking. QS ranking, unfortunately, has become this big 900-pound gorilla that sits in all these discussions, but I think it really has to be taken with a pinch of salt as to what those rankings really mean.
Can I go
Shipra,
next?
yeah.
I think fabulous response, Professor Sagar, and you've stolen words from me. But just building upon this, and I'll share my experience in the UK. So I spent the better part of my career in UK in financial services sector, and I was one of the only Indians working in top managerial roles there. My peers who were local, either from UK itself or other European countries, they came from, non-STEM background. So my boss, for instance, was a history graduate, right? Now, it is inconceivable for someone in India to be taken in for financial services job if they don't have a math or engineering background, right? Now, why is this? Is it just perception? I don't think so. Again, going back to the rigor of our primary education and college education, I think it's not about the stream, it's about the rigor we bring into training people, right? We don't focus on well-rounded personalities, right? Our students, right, how many of them will be confident enough to deal with uncertain situation, to go out and public speaking, for instance, right? I am an IIT Kanpur alumna and ISB graduate, right? Some of the education served me well from there, but most of my learning came from the job that I was doing in the UK, right? I learned much more from my peers who had history and geography background than what I learned, in my institute. So that is one, again, not the stream, but how we are grooming children, right? That is one. The second part of it, I think we don't emphasize enough on skilling. When we talk of industry ready, right? First, we have to take cognizance of what kind of demands do we have locally. Our education system is either too much focused on, generating, manpower to fuel either, administrative jobs, right? So that becoming an IS becomes a top aspiration, or going into STEM with the ultimate objective of going abroad and earning in foreign currency, right? How many of us, our institutes, focused on solving for the local industry that we have here, right? So skilling is a big piece that is currently missing from our education. These are the two things that I wanted to passionately bring into the conversation.
Quick last words, Ananya, and then Shobni.
So on undergraduate education, I think you should have a panel on undergraduate education because it is so key. So if from NEP I take this one piece, which is a 4-year degree with the 4th year on research, with which you can directly go into a PhD program if you wanted to, or directly go and do several things. So this is what we have at Shivnadar. And we see our students do extremely well, irrespective of what field. And the other thing that we have is, and it's very common in outside India in many places, that you can combine totally unrelated disciplines like physics and English and computer science and literature and so on. And the student graduates with this kind of, combination of subjects where they always stand out amongst their peers. So this is the goal. But to get there, given the systemic barriers that we have in India, is a long process. But it requires, I've used this term before, it really requires a lot of thinking. And and thinking and implementation, again, at a very micro level, you need to think about how this kind of education can be imparted. And in terms of, what should the undergraduate education do? Should it provide the jobs? And parents, I talk to parents every day, they ask 2 questions. What is the ranking? And what was the last year's highest package? These are the 2 most important questions. So we answer that, but I also see the very inspiring tension in the parent whose daughter or son writes very nice poetry, would like to study literature, but they think, will you ever get a job? And this is a societal issue. This is market determined. This is not even public policy. But if I were to give you my, true answer that I believe in, what should the undergraduate education be for? It should be for the realization of the fullest potential of that person. So if you can do physics and poetry, and you can be a confident person and do karate, that is what undergraduate education should enable you to do. But it could, sometimes I feel this may be a very elitist idea, but then I also know that in India, under very difficult circumstances, just through the the effort of different teachers and in different ways, people are able to also achieve this kind of multidimensional, often through a lot of decisions taken by parents, that you will do music, you will learn dance, and they put in a lot of effort to make that happen with very little resource. I'm not talking about elite families. So I feel hopeful that if we could have a public discourse, not about whether we are creating the right skill set for industry, whatever that means, but are we able to realize the human potential to its fullest extent, whatever that is? That would take us to a different level. That would be the precursor for quality, whether it's undergraduate, PhD, research, whatever. But it's very easy for me to sit here and say that. How we actually do it in a country of so many people and such a divided society is a very big societal challenge.
So Shobhni, I brought you in late, so I'll give you the last word of the panelists.
It's hard to go after Ananya. I absolutely loved what she said, and I think it's a really nice way to sort of talk about the different pushes and pulls that you see in the ecosystem with the talent we have, the potential we have. And coming back to 2 points that were made, just, and I said this earlier as well, is just the skills that people are coming with, but it's not just the hard skills, but it's the soft skills. And we are a recipient of the product of institutions in India and worldwide. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that kids, the coping mechanisms that children have actually is, there should be a way, and again, what Ananya was saying, there should be a way for them to be able to learn that while they are going through the education system. A lot of them end up learning while on the job, and that's always a harder, we've seen the harder parts that students have to take. But having said that, I think we've been seeing a lot more students coming out, I think now, of what you're calling the IB system. I'm not fully clear of what that IB system is. But there is a bit of, I would say there's a little bit of a privilege and elitism associated with that. So we get a lot less diversity. But having said that, I think there's, they come in with a very, very different set of skill sets and a very different way of looking at the critical thinking. I think that they have, because somebody's done physics with piano. So it's very different. But I think there's a little bit. I would love to see how we democratize some of these sort of practices infuse them into a lot more institutions across the board.
Well, it leaves me to actually just wind this up by saying, Trendspotting, we don't ever come up with answers, right? On it, we come up with a discussion, which leads to more questions, which leads to more nuances, right? On it, but I do hope this evening of 1.5 hours plus has made you think a little bit about these issues, and if it has, then we've achieved the aim of having you here. It leaves me to thank the 4 panelists. Thank you very much for being here. If you're interested in Trendspotting, the next one is pretty much exactly a month from now, the 21st of June. And in that, we're going to go to the school education system, right, on it. And what we're going to actually explore there in a very broad way is that our exam's the tip of the tail that's wagging the dog. And we're going to unpack that a little bit a month from now, right? Thank you all for being here this evening.